the world is inevitably moving towards a more multipolar model. And so Europe is one of the flashpoints of these tensions. So we're going to analyze that today and see where things are and how they're changing, evolving very quickly. And I just want to start by saying that it's important to know, no matter what one thinks of the governments or economic systems in China and Russia, this new world Cold War must be opposed. And rather than accepting the unipolar model of US hegemony, we need to work towards a multipolar model of international cooperation based in the UN Charter, which guarantees the sovereignty of all nations and their right to make their own economic and political choices. So this is a perspective that we'll be speaking from. We are fortunate to have an excellent panel of speakers today from 5 different countries in Europe. And we'll hear from them in the following order. Rainer Rupp from Germany, then Rada Drobac from Serbia, then Bruno Drosky from France and Poland, then Attila Meleg from Hungary, and then Francesco Marinjo from Italy. And I'd like to ask the speakers to limit their comments to 10 minutes. So the presentation period will cover just about an hour, and then we'll have time for questions and answers from the participants on the Zoom session. So, and also I'd like to ask all of the participants on Zoom, please to mute yourselves. Okay, could you take a moment to notice if you're muted or not, to make sure that you are muted, okay. Except for Rainer, who will speak first. Rainer Rupp is an economist and a former intelligence agent with the Foreign Intelligence Service of East Germany. He is now a well-known political commentator in Germany. Rainer, let me give you the floor, please.
Thank you, Danielle. To start off, I'll in my introductory statement, I'm looking at the origin and the causes for the new Cold War against Russia. And only if we understand these origins, we will see what's actually going on behind the scene. And for that, we have to go back to 1990, 1991. It's a long time, when the United States, as the only remaining superpower, prepared for the post-Soviet world. The US-led war against Iraq at the time set the scene for the then US President George Bush to tout in his public speeches the concept of the New World Order, his concept of the New World Order, which under US leadership would bring, in his own words, lasting peace and prosperity to the world. However, the draft for this New World Order was produced, as we could imagine, in the Pentagon. General Walter R. Sharp, for instance, head of the working group to define Bush's New World Order, stipulated, for instance, that the creation of a quote, an international community, which is physically safe, economically stable, and culturally free, could only happen through the further development of international economic interdependence by grinding down the national barriers to economic and financial affairs. I mean, total globalization. In this vein, General Sharp also condemned the principle of national sovereignty as outdated but still popular fetishism. Pentagon scientist and US government advisor Daniel Papp defined Bush's New World Order as a US-led, unipolar world based on American power at the highest level. At the level below, the world would be organized in 3 economic and trading blocs controlled by Washington as part of the globalization. One of them was foreseen to be the EU. I mean, that was to be the EU's task in the New World Order. But what happens, for instance, to nations that that value their sovereignty and define their interests differently from the US-led international community? The New World Order also had a solution for this. These nations were considered to be rogue or aggressor states that have nothing good to expect as a member of the Pentagon's New World Order's armament group at the time. Mr. Wright made it clear that, quote unquote, the lesson of the Iraq war 1991, was that a small state cannot defend itself against the air force of a superpower, unquote. This was widely praised as, quote, a really visionary strategy for international policing in the New World Order. Referring to Iraq's fate in 1991, President Bush personally reminded the world that all other rogue states must recognize that in the face of the, quote, the horrors of war, no nation can stand up to the united world. And that is therefore better for them to, quote, return to the family of peace-loving nations. The core elements of the Bush New World Order are reflected in the various justifications for what we now call neoliberal globalization, or what the elites call the rule-based international order. On the surface, it's all about free trade, democracy, economic prosperity, and Western values, but underneath, it comes down to the threat of or the use of raw military force for the benefit of the elites. That was actually openly admitted by Thomas L. Friedman, at the time one of the most influential commentators of the New York Times, when he wrote in his Manifesto for a Fast World, quote, free market capitalism is spread to virtually every corner of the world, is protected primarily by US military power. On the day that the US-led NATO began its war of aggression against the rest of Yugoslavia, this very same Friedman wrote in the New York Times, for globalization to work, America must not be afraid to act as the all-powerful superpower it is. The invisible hand of the market will never work without F-15 designer McDonnell Douglas. And the invisible fist that ensures the world is safe for McDonald's hamburger restaurants and Silicon Valley technologies is called US Army, US Navy, US Air Force, and Marine Corps. Now we got the gist of it all. At the time of the war against the rest of Yugoslavia, Bush's New World Order was already firmly established and embraced by the elites of the Western community of values. This is clearly shown by the following excerpts from an August 1998 analysis of the private intelligence service Stratfor, which I suppose we all know. With a note of surprise, Stratfor underlined at the time, I quote, the vision of the New World Order was shared by much of the world's elite, despite continuing US unilateralism. According to Stratfor, the success of this ideology of the New World Order lies in the fact that fundamental political differences between nations, i.e. between the elites of nations, that's important for the rest of it, between the elites of nations had disappeared. Bush's New World Order has created a new quality in relations between capitalists and imperialist states as a result. Now I quote just two paragraphs of the Stratfor analysis, and then I'm almost finished. According to this New World vision, this is a quote from Stratfor, according to this New World Order vision, fundamental political disagreements between nations had disappeared. Rather than being ideologically divided, all major nations now agreed on fundamental core principles. Responsible people everywhere accept the proposition that economic growth and prosperity were interests that transcend all others. That being the case, it was essential to maintain international stability in order to facilitate that prosperity. And because all major nations agreed on the desirability of prosperity and international stability, fundamental international disputes like those that led to the two world wars and the Cold War were no longer significant problems. The only international problems faced by the United States and its allies were the management of marginal outlaw states like Iraq, North Korea, internal instability as in Yugoslavia and Somalia, and outbreaks of international terrorism. Because all these nations were now responsible, and any reasonable nation could see the need to prevent civil wars, outlawed nations, or terrorism from spreading misery and, very important, and upsetting financial markets. It followed that all nations would be prepared to cooperate in managing these marginal problems. These were, after all, marginal issues. What really had to be managed was the international economic system, especially the integration of former communist nations into the system. This is unquote from Stratford. And now the very last. By 1998, the Western elites were firmly convinced that they also had the elites of Russia's Yeltsin government firmly on the board of their new world order. And there were no way back, that there would be no way back for Russia. But then in the same year, 1998, came the financial collapse of Russia. Neither the West nor the IMF could help. In Moscow, this experience changed everything. It brought forces to the fore that rejected the sellout of the Russian economy to Western elite interests at the expense of the suffering Russian people. Eventually, Vladimir Putin emerged as the leader of this movement, which in a long struggle re-established Russian sovereignty and freedom from Western financial coercion and economic blackmail. This is the reason, in my view, why Russia is now considered a rogue state by the global neoliberal elites from Washington via Brussels to Berlin. Russia represents for the world at large a valuable alternative to neoliberal globalizations and wars to that end. This, again, in my view, is the basis for the understanding of the new Cold War now being waged against Russia. And it is the basis for the understanding why the German or the European elites are so eager to side with Washington at the expense of the interest of their people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rainer. Thank you. I will go immediately to our next speaker, which is Rada Drobac. Rada Drobac is the Deputy President of the Belgrade Forum for a World of Equals. He's a former diplomat with the Yugoslav and then the Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and former Serbian ambassador to Hungary. Welcome, Rada Drobac.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the organizer for giving me the possibility to speak today here and praise them for choosing such an interesting subject. In the same time, on behalf of Belgrade Forum for the World of Equals, that I'm representing as a Deputy President, I'm taking this opportunity to transmit to all the participants best wishes for the success of this discussion panel. Dear colleagues, I think that today we can't speak about new Cold War because the actual situation in the world and the repartition of forces on the international level, even in Europe itself, is totally different than it was during the period of Cold War. Then we had just two superpowers confronted ideologically and strategically. Today we are living in the post-American world in emerging multilateral reality characterized by the appearance of new powers and a number of states that are rapidly strengthening themselves to the point to become a challenge to every superpower. Also, today, there is no more ideological conflict between the opponent force, just strategic, political, and economic differences. Let me remind you that in the time of the Cold War, Europe was divided between Western capitalist countries and Eastern socialist countries aligned in NATO and Warsaw Pact, with some neutral countries such as Yugoslavia. The bloc were confronted in many questions, in first place about the vision of the world ideologically. What was incontestable is that time was the leadership of the United States of America over the Western and Soviet Union over the Eastern Bloc. Their rivalry resulted in regional crisis, race and arms production, local wars, and instabilities, verbal confrontation, but the global war didn't happen because of the balance of power and fear between them. Such a situation facilitated the appearance of the third bloc, movement of non-aligned countries, which occupied the space between them and became an important factor in the international theater, balancing between them and defending the interests of small countries and the improvement of the international law and cooperation. One of the leading countries of that movement was Yugoslavia, that helped many small countries to get independence and liberate themselves from colonial powers, to grow economically, to get strength politically, and to unite in that international movement in their own interest and in the interest of all small countries. But despite its importance and big number of members, the movement never had enough capacities to become a third superpower. It was just a big international voting machine without real power, military and economically. When we speak about today's Europe, we have to have in mind that actually the big majority of European countries are members of the European Union or are in some relation with it. That means that almost whole today's Europe is oriented toward Western values, whatever that means, from European Union member countries, candidates for membership countries, even neutral ones such Sweden or Switzerland, or Norway, for example, not member of European Union, but member of NATO. This is the consequence of the period of United States of America domination over the world as a unique superpower after the breakout of Soviet Union in a number of new independent states used by United States to take them under its influence. The result is that today almost whole Europe is the zone of influence of the United States of America. But if almost all Europe is today politically oriented to the West, that doesn't mean the European Union and other countries in Europe close to it are unified and without problems. European Union had passed years of growth and strength, political influence and financial power from small group of countries to a potent internationally important organization from 6 to 28 member countries, from union of countries gathered for one purpose to almost superstate. During a long period from 52, when European Union was born, until today, changing its structure, unifying every time more from Rome Agreement in 58, unification of executive powers in 67, Maastricht Agreement in 93, Amsterdam Agreement in 99, adoption of Euro in 2002, Nice Agreement in 2003 to Lisbon Treaty in 2009, that international organization with ambition to become global power and global multi-ethnic and multi-confessional superstate took many faces and practices, attracted many European countries to be part of it in the attempt to become a superpower. From 52, it enlarged 6 times, from 73, 88, 87, 95, 2004, 2007, until 2013, when Croatia became its 28th member. But it seems that last 10 years, European Union is facing serious problems and the erosion of its unity and power. It started to lose discipline of the member countries, unity over the same goals, strength, vision, support of the member state, facing differences of the member state about internal and international policy, the policy of enlargement, and it seems began to understand, if true, that Brussels overestimated its power to manage so many different countries and oblige them, despite their particular interest, to unify our same goals. Nowadays, we are witnessing that the United Kingdom has left European Union, searching its freedom, sovereignty, and independence, not without problems and consequences on both sides. The exit of United Kingdom left European Union much weaker than it was, especially damaged its image of prosperity, wellness, and progress, and worse, left it without vision how to overpass the situation when one of its most prestigious members has left the organization. Moreover, it emerged then clear that between European Union members there is a different views about the structure of the organization and its future transformation. There is the group of the countries that advocate stronger unification of the executive power in the attempt to become global multinational superstate with the main power in Brussels, with supremacy over the nation states and their executive power. But also there is a number of countries that oppose to that, especially and openly country members of the Visegrad Group, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and Czech Republic, that don't want to leave their national executive power to Brussels. This problem is becoming every day more evident and important, blocking the efficiency of the organization in many fields, including finances, budget, internal and foreign policies. Speaking about the problems of the European Union, one of the most urgent to resolve is also the relation between United States of America and European Union. During the mandate of the former American President Donald Trump, the differences between USA and EU became very serious, from political priorities, economic cooperation with Russian Federation and China, defense policies, and about energy supplies. European Union is now in a situation to decide if it would continue to be as it was until Donald Trump came to power, strongly linked to USA, or to search its own road. In both cases, it has to resolve the relations between its two strongest member states, Germany and France, differences between nationalist countries such as Visegrad Group and globally oriented ones, and to settle its relation with USA and United Kingdom. So it is evident that today, world differ very much from the one during Cold War, and already, as it is already elaborated in the arguments that give reason why today we can't speak about Cold War, but what we can is to speak about hope that the new balances of power in the world could be the opportunity to start again to respect international law, not only interest of the most mighty countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rada Drobac. Now we'll turn to Bruno Drosky. Bruno Drovsky is a historian and political scientist. He's the co-director of the Polish section of the National Institute of Oriental Languages and Civilizations, INALCO, at the Sorbonne University in Paris. Please, Bruno.
Okay, so many thanks for inviting me at this very interesting forum, and I will try to be short in 10 minutes and to present issues that needs normally a little bit more than 10 minutes. But anyway, if we observe the crisis of the global capitalist system, and especially since the beginning of the actual pandemic, and if we observe simultaneously the way China, Eastern Asian nations, but even Belarus and Russia did organize their health system and their economy, and if we observe the developing trends on a worldwide scale, it seems obvious apparently that European countries should rationally at least take an active part in every possible economical, commercial, or communication initiatives promoting activities linking Asia, Eurasia, and Western Europe. Of course, I think about the One Belt, One Road initiative, but there are a lot of other ones. But if we observe the situation, we see that every time there is some process tending toward new form of international cooperation between European nations or European Union as a whole, and Russia or China or Iran or other countries of Eurasia, almost automatically political difficulties appears in spite of the neoliberal dogma pretending that market, trade, and economical cooperations should not depend on political decisions. So frankly speaking, I think Europe as a whole and most European countries aren't able to carry on now any dynamic or constructive policy, both on economical or political fields, because of ideological blockade linked with US pressures. Europe is under a strong ideological pressures, and if they will not be a fundamental, and I would say a revolutionary change, things will not change, and European countries will tend to be more and more passive and stagnating. And they will miss the last trains of history in favor of much more dynamic regions of the world. Frankly speaking, I'm not sure European countries now count anymore now in the world as an active, creative, and constructive historical factor. Why? Of course, because deindustrialization, because of concentration of industries linked with military-industrial complex, because of an economic system linked mostly with services, informatics, finance, and especially with US dollars, all that explain why a large part of European elites are integrated with USA as a political power or with US economy and companies on the economical ground. And this explain why they don't want these links be cut, even if we observe the decaying of the US North Atlantic unipolar order. We know also that the US intelligence services, US governmental, US non-governmental agencies have since the Cold War a very strong influence in Europe. For example, in France, if we look at the intelligence activity in French companies, of course, nobody will write it in the medias, but about 75% of espionage activity in French companies are coming from United States and not from China or Russia or any other countries in the world. And but of course it's a secret, state secret situation, but it's an official document I'm talking about. And of course, we have to add to that the cultural hegemony of the neoliberal, conservative trends. And that makes the situation we are facing now, that in right-wing or left-wing milieux in France or in Europe or in Poland, whenever you talk about China, about Russia, about Iran, about Syria, about Belarus, or even about Venezuela and Cuba, it's very difficult to have a real open-minded, pluralistic discussion about those issues. In the same time, we have a very strong, I will first talk about France and then about Poland. So we have in France a very strong delegitimization of the dominant system. We saw quite a lot of strike. We saw a lot of strikes. We have now having a lot of strike in France, a lot of manifestations in spite of the curfew against security laws, against neoliberal reforms. And we have even now, for the last month, we had an IMF report stating that France is on the border of social explosion. And in the same time, this week in the French business newspaper Capital, you had an appeal of higher officers of the French army telling that the NATO interference in the French political affairs is unbearable. So it means that even in the army, there are which is supposed to be a very quiet and passive pro-governmental organization, you have now people that are fed up, let's say, with the present situation. But in the same time, as I told you, basically there is no ideological breakthrough, and it is still very difficult to discuss about basic things like EU. The question of EU is not on debate, even within radical left group. The question of NATO is not on debate. The questions of wars in Africa and Syria, which France is part of, is not on debate. And the question of foreign policies generally are not on debate. So I think that this mental blockade will not change if there is no real ideological breakthrough, and I don't know, of course, if it will happen. In Poland, the situation is, of course, much worse if we look on the general situation concerning international relation. Even if on the other side we can say that Poles feel, but maybe they're not right, but anyway, they feel that their health situation is better than in Western Europe. On the same time, we had this year in Poland a mass mobilization for women rights, abortion rights, and against what we can call church, clericalist, and nationalistic regime. But this mobilization is in fact an intra-systemic protest because there is a consensus in the elites about Russia and about NATO and about EU, which is also unbreakable or apparently unbreakable. In the same time, we can see signs in the government or in the society that if the Russophobic relation are, the Russophobic point of view is strictly dominant, there is a difference concerning China. Sometimes you have positive opinions toward China is within the government or within the public opinion, but every time Poland is taking some action, some initiative in the direction of cooperating with China on economical level, always there is something happening that breaks all the dynamics for political reason, for a different reason. It's very difficult sometimes to know. Some people just think it's the interference of the US Secret Services within Polish elites that blockades what was going to develop. Anyway, the result is like that. So what we can observe in Poland is the fact that there is a strong miscontent within the peasant population, and it's the only social category in Poland where there is some elements denouncing Russophobic attitudes, because peasants are rather thinking that a good relation with Russia is positive for Polish agriculture, at least. We observe something very recent this year. If you look at internet discussion in Poland, you can understand that Poles, and especially the very young ones, it means between 15 and 25 years, are really fed up with the anti-communist, anti-Russian, pro-US, pro-EU discourses. But this discourse is still dominant within, of course, the nationalist government, but also liberal or moral left, let's say, elite, which dominate the left in Poland. So I would say that it looks now that French Poles, and I guess other Europeans, do not believe anymore in the basic dominant strategical, economical, social, and political discourses. But in the same time, the degree of the social mobilization is different according to different countries, but it hesitates to put on the first range the strategical questions, the questions of political alliance, the question of NATO, the question of EU, and the question of relation with Russia or with China or with any other country, Iran, Venezuela, and so on. So nothing will change. And I think that European Union and European countries will be decaying powers as soon as there will, until there will be no fundamental breakdown with in the ideological sphere, which means a real cultural revolution and a real the acceptation in France that Europe is not the center of the world, and that what happens in Europe is not so important as it was in the 19th century and 20th century, and that the non-Western world is growing and giving some answers Western societies are not coping with. Of course, it's hard to predict what will happen, and I don't know how what will be the evolution of this strong miscontent. As I told you, IMF is talking about social explosions in France. But as we know from the experiments of the Arab Spring or the colored revolution in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine especially, we know that very well how NGOs and Western and US secret services managed to organize the miscontent when the miscontent became to be dangerous for their hegemony. So now there is something like a fight with times. Do the alternative, the real alternative force will take the lead, or will the manipulators control the miscontent, as they did in most of the case during the last 20 years in the Arab world or in Eastern Europe? Okay.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Thank you. And so now we will turn to Attila Melek. Attila is a sociologist, economist, and a historian, and an associate professor at the Corvinus University in Budapest. Attila, please.
Yes. Well, welcome everybody in this Sunday afternoon, morning, whichever time zone we are. And we are facing an enormously complex issue, which needs proper historical material analysis and discursive analysis. So allow me in this debate or discussion just to make some points, some contributions to this from an East European perspective, and very importantly, adding some special points concerning my own country, Hungary, which is playing some kind of a role in this global historical process. So I'm just going to make some contributions to the debates. I'm not going to solve them, but I would like to provoke some discussion concerning some issues. The first thing which has already been questioned in this discussion, are we just having a new Cold War? And now I'm focusing on the problem of political global discourses. And my point is that I think we need to separate any kind of Russophobic, Russia-related discourses from the discourses going on China. And I would like to argue that I think, although history is feeding a lot of things from a Cold War perspective, the current discourse on Russia is not a real continuation of the Cold War, while in the case of China, I see it. Why I'm saying this? Ever since the West, kidnapped global economic relations in the form of colonial capitalism, and was able to hack the system in such a way which led to massive unequal development, the West also created some kind of a political language, which we can say it's kind of an East-West civilizational discourse, colonial discourse, very much justifying any kind of an intervention, justifying any kind of a hegemonic rule in this, justifying, making cultural and social differences into some kind of a hierarchical order. Now, this discursive form is extremely powerful. Most importantly, our beloved academia is playing its prominent role in recreating this again and again and again. Now, this has nonetheless historically several forms. And I would regard the Cold War East-West discourse as promoted by the West, distinct from the pre-Cold War and the post-Cold War scenario, most importantly towards Russia or even Eastern Europe in that respect. Why I'm saying this? Because the great achievement of East European countries, socially, very importantly, also in economy, forced the West for a while in the Cold War discourse, as it was pointed out, to see itself in a competitive framework. That is to say, it was a competitive modernity scenario in which the modernity of the East could not be really questioned, and that it was a competing force. And it was somewhat balancing as well, which caused a lot of headache, of course, among Western scholars and politicians, how to handle this amazingly new situation. During that period, which lasted till the 1970s, the discourse was very much about capacities, about potentials, about, you know, modernization terms. Let's put in this way, modernization terms, that's the best. Now, what happened later, when actually Eastern Europe, in a very particular situation, gave up the development from the 1980s already continuously, and gave up its own potential in this kind of a development for various reasons. I'm not going to into that. That was paralleled by shifting to the pre-war, the pre-Second War, civilizational kind of a semi-colonial kind of a discourse, which is more in terms of culture, more in terms of civilization, and so on. And I think Russia is not the Soviet Union. We need to make that clear, whatever memory we have, and then how we are positioned in this itself. So more and more, the discourse concerning Russia has been moving into this kind of pre-Second World War type of a discourse. That is not the case with regard to China, because China is actually taking over, in some ways, the previous position of East European countries in terms of dramatic social and economic success, and the dramatic potential of coming up as a competitive force, which needs to be taken very seriously in whatever circumstances throughout the world. But that's not the case, I think, with regard to Russia, whatever its military and so on potential is still at the moment. So I think I would just raise this point that I think we should separate these things together. Of course, there are common elements in this. Of course, the West is always talking in an Orientalist framework, and it's always anti-communist for them. And then, you know, anything which links these things, then it's okay. Now, the next point I would like to talk about is the recent East European development, right? And once again, let me just make some points here, because it's, once again, I'm just saying it's too complex to handle this in 10 minutes. The most important thing that Eastern Europe went through a dramatic experience in the 1990s and 2000s. Basically, it created a super globalized status for itself. It opened up at such a level to foreign capital and foreign influence, which even that has not seen earlier, which was already rather important. This is why I could see Anna Maria Ortner is sitting here. So it was a semi-periphery, super integrated into these global markets, most importantly to the EU. And this led to kind of a double disaster. First of all, socially it became way too competitive that these societies can handle this. So there's a lot of hatred, a lot of animosity in these societies. Plus, very importantly, it did not really succeed in economic terms, although in some ways it regained some past dependency of development around the global average, but it was losing economic weight, it was losing influence, it was losing all kinds of strengths. Plus, the crisis of 2008 was the final moment of this super globalized situation, which led to a reaction. And what we see now is a post-2018, 2010 situation, and Eastern Europe is in a dramatic change in this respect. And it is trying to get to its sense in some ways, in very weird ways, of course. Now, with this, of course, no question, and then Bruno made very important remarks concerning this is already the rise of nationalism, the rise of sovereignism, and so on behalf of Eastern Europe has become a very important historical force. And then this is trying to reconsider its maneuvering positions. Now, in this respect, I would like to make two comments which are interrelated to each other. There is a misunderstanding in the analysis of the political economy of these relationships. So Russia, Eastern Europe, China, Eastern Europe relationships. Most importantly now the China one is that the key point is not how Eastern Europe is related to China just in itself, because it's a triangle, because Eastern Europe is feeding the German economy, competing with China. So actually Eastern Europe is in a kind of a double situation in this respect. And this we need to take into account, otherwise we don't understand really the situation. The other point I'm trying to make is that East Europeans, or at least East European nationalists, have learned one thing. First of all, nobody's happy in being a hierarchical situation, right? So even East European nationalists, of course, they don't like being, you know, that they are washed up, they are the sponge which the West is washing up all kinds of things. So there is a reaction, and then they discovered a new scenario, which varies throughout Eastern Europe, namely that they are trying to use both Russia and China to improve their positions in renegotiating the positions toward the West. So this is a kind of new technique, and then I would say this we can call kind of an emancipation strategies reconfigured in East European nationalist ways, which means that, and then now I'm openly referring to my own country, that I think one of the things what Orban as let's put in this, I don't know how to call it, this kind of new nationalism of Orban is actually trying to get both Russia and China as a background on the basis of which it wants to renegotiate East-West relationships within the European Union. I'm not saying that they would like to get out of the European Union. I think there is no political economic situation in which they could do it, or it would be feasible at the moment. But I definitely say this now, because the time is already over. I just would like to make a final point that we need to analyze carefully how Eastern Europe is integrated in terms of its economic and political economic relationships toward Russia and toward China. And once again, we see dramatic differences in this respect. Russia is, of course, energy, metallurgical industry, and various branches of the economy in which it works. But the case of China is actually getting very complex. Chinese investment is going up dramatically. I think the financial integration of this region is also increasing day by day. And I just I would like to raise at the very end that I think Eastern Europe in various parts, and I would like to make huge differences. So Poland and Hungary are very close, but they are not the same at all, right? Romania is very different in this respect. Serbia is another type of a player. The Czech Republic, even more. So, I mean, these things are very, very important. And in case we have a little time, I'm happy to come back to this. But I think that now, and this is the last point, Eastern Europe has started learning certain things, both from Russia in some ways, in this anti-American, anti-North-Western European strategies, but also very importantly, China. And I think that they have realized one thing, that the success of China needs to be considered as reconfiguring the model here in Eastern Europe as well. That would be the last point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Attila. That was very interesting. And finally, we'll go to Francesco Maringio, who is a journalist from Italy, President of the Italy-China Association for the Promotion of the Belt and Road Initiative. Francesco.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. It's my big honor to be with all of you today, and thanks for this kind invitation. I would like to start from 1946, when George Kennan wrote a special telegram to the State Department from the US Embassy in Moscow. And this telegram went down in the history as the long telegram. Its theory inspired Truman's containment policy in 1947 and President Eisenhower's secret strategy seminar in the summer of 1953. The aftermath of those choices is part of history. The birth of Atlantic Alliance, the Cold War, the race for atomic armament, regional conflict in Asia and Africa, and so on. In reality, the United States was working to make its presence permanent on European continent, at least in the western part, and to help strengthen a process of continental integration that would represent a counter-offensive by European capital to the activism of workers' movement and partisan liberation movements, and also the construction of Euro-Atlantic bloc of power. With the defeat of Soviet Union, this process would find a further expansion phase with the war of aggression against Yugoslavia and the admission first in the NATO club and then in the European Union of Eastern countries that are strong allies of the US and among the main players in the anti-Russian and anti-communist hysteric campaign around the world. So today, in the attempt to repeat the history, another telegram has appeared, published by the Atlantic Council, the Washington think tank that is an active supporter of the American primacy. The headline is the longer telegram, longer because it's more than twice as long as the Kennan's, which in defining China as an expansionist strategic enemy specifies that the United States must do to deal with this threat and to convince China, it's their words, that it's interest, the Chinese interest, to continue to operate within the liberal international order led by the United States. Once again, there are some facts that illustrate the strategic relevance of this US approach. For example, the 2011 pivot to Asia and the 2017 US National Security Strategy, which called for strategic competition with China that is called revisionist power. According to Chinese scholars, the US strategy can no longer be that of the containment, but the use of notion of confinement. Since the People's Republic is the world's second largest economy, and applying the Cold War style strategy of containment to it will not work. The US main objective, the US main goal is therefore to prevent China from moving up the global value chain to become an advanced manufacturing power. Yet the world is changed deeply since the days of the Cold War. Already more than a decade ago, the Italian-American economist Giovanni Arrighi described the contemporary world as being marked by systematic chaos that brings with its hegemonic transition, in particular the move from American hegemony to something else, with China running to take the place of the US. Today, we are faced with a turning point resulting from the economic and financial crisis of 2008, which eroded the foundations of American hegemony, with China overtaking Japan in 2010, becoming the second largest economy on the planet and conquering the peaks of technological innovation. The pandemic crisis amplified this trend, and China became the country that overtook the US in the value of trade with European Union. In the year in which the EU-China investment agreement was announced, with the US that is scrutinizing very carefully this topic. From my perspective, the US strategy in Europe changed in the Obama period when the fear emerged in the American apparatus that Germany was becoming too powerful economically and was manipulating the EU institution for its own purpose. The country's relation with China are considered with suspicion, but above all, the German special relation with Russia, sealed with the Nord Stream project that directly connects the two countries, bypassing the so-called Iron Curtain of the Russia-phobic and more pro-Atlantic countries in the European continent. The strategy became even more evident in the Trump years. The relationship with Germany and Russia is also alarming in the light of another aspect. A part of the American apparatus and some European elite is pushing for a major openness to Russia. Of course, in an anti-Chinese key, in order to disrupt or try to disrupt the Sino-Russia Pact and the Euro-Asian cooperation between these two great countries. But opening up to Russia, if it were to lead to greater cooperation to French-German axis and Moscow's special relations of friendship with Italy, not to mention Serbia or Greece, would create an imbalance in relation in favor of Euro-Asian cooperation, which Washington fears greatly. And then again, there is Berlin's relationship with Beijing, which the Atlantic Alliance is trying to undermine by attacking German manufacturing with its Green Revolution plan. Also, the Italian context is equally interesting. When the American presidency changed, there was a change in the Italian government, demonstrating that we are a country with limited sovereignty, at least since the Second World War. The previous government was blamed for being too open to the Trump administration and too nonchalant in building relations with China, to the point of being the first and only G7 country to sign the Belt and Road Initiative memorandum with China. The current Prime Minister guarantees the Atlantic Solidarity Alliance for at least 3 points of view. The first is cooperation with Germany and France in the process of consolidating the Eurozone, in order to contrast the popular protest movement that have challenged and criticized the European Union. Keeping the EU together is a key element for the US in its strategy of strategic confrontation with Russia and China. On the second hand, Italian Prime Minister has an historic closeness to the most important part of the American apparatus and guarantees the US that Italy will counter Germany in its attempt to transform its economic hegemony into a strategic factor. Last but not least, the third point, the current Prime Minister may become a balancing element to the foreign policies in Italy of the current Vatican head of state, to the current Pope, whose vision overturns the hierarchical approach that would have the West and the center of the war, manifesting a clear intention to dialogue with China. In conclusion, a plan for Europe which is able to protect and respect the sovereignty of each country and become a continent committed to peace and international cooperation can materialize if two preconditions are satisfied. The first one is the exit from Atlantic Alliance to a process of accumulation of forces that would impose new and advanced equilibriums between capital and labor in Europe. The second one is what Samir Amin called the construction of a new political and strategic alliance between Paris, Berlin, Moscow, extended if possible to Beijing and Delhi. That is a strategy of Euro-Asian cooperation for the 21st century. And therefore, by quitting Russia-phobic attitude in Europe, and above all, by quitting the arrogant claim of wishing to impose everywhere and all the time the proposition of our social model to the rest of the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you also. Thank you very much to you, Francesco, and thank you to all of our speakers for these very, very interesting comments. We'll go on to our second half of the session now by opening up questions for the audience. So what I will ask people to do is to use the raise hand symbol on Zoom, because I will not look at the chat. I will not see you if you ask questions in the chat. Just raise your hand. And I see that Radhika has her hand up. And would you like to say something, Radhika?
Yeah, well, thanks to all the speakers for an absolutely fascinating set of presentations and also very thought-provoking. I have just a general question, and it's directed towards all, perhaps, or at least most speakers. I just wanted to want them to comment on what they see are the key dividing lines among the business elites and among the political elites on the matter of the new Cold War. That is to say, whether to lean towards the United States or to lean towards Russia and or China. For instance, the recently elected new head of the CDU, for example, in Germany is said to be, leaning more towards China, etc., and Russia and so on. So can you say elaborate a little bit more? Some of you already said a few things about it, but can you elaborate a little bit more? And also whether these political divisions coincide with divisions within the capitalist classes in the various countries that you are talking about. Thank you.
Excellent question. Thank you very much, Radhika. We'll take a couple of questions, so maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll give the floor back to our speakers, all of you who would like to speak. So I see that John Ross would like to ask a question. Please, John.
Yeah, again, my question can sort of be addressed to everybody or those who wish to comment upon it, right? What I was struck by in the discussion is really the lack of reference to China. The framework that was seen in the Cold War primarily concentrated on the situation of Russia. I don't mean that no speakers mentioned Russia in that, but and this was striking for me because for me, the key of the situation isn't in Europe. The key of the situation is in the relations between China and the United States. Just to explain my background on this, from 1992 to 2000, I lived in Moscow. So I actually saw the collapse of 1998 with my own eyes, right? And for the last 12 years, I've been in Chinese universities. So I can see both the Russian and the Chinese aspect. The most striking thing is the change in Russia itself. I wrote an article in 1992 called "Why the Economic Reform Will Succeed in China and Fail in Russia." People said there's nothing to learn from China. Russia has nothing to learn from China. I was told this by very, very high political people, incidentally, who should have known better because some of the mistakes were rather disgraceful. Now, if you look at the latest opinion polls, 75% of the Russian population has a favorable attitude towards China. The problem for Russia is the failure of its economic policy. In 1992, the Russian and Chinese economies were about the same size. Now, the Chinese economy is many times larger than that of the Russian policy. Also, it's only the China, in my conception, is powerful enough to stand up to the United States. Incidentally, just to do a little plug, I hope people see in the chat about the No Cold War campaign, which takes up all Cold Wars, although it involves China. Those who haven't signed, I hope will sign. But what I really want to do is therefore to get from any of the speakers who want to comment on their reflections on the situation for China, because I think that you can't understand the situation in Europe without seeing the relations between China, the United States, and China and Europe.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions for the moment, so I'll bring the attention back to our speakers. Who would like to go first? If there's anybody who'd like to jump in among our speakers, please, Rainer, I see you ready.
As Germany was mentioned, and the the head of the Christian Democratic Union party, which is the ruling party in Germany, Merkel's party. In the view of the Cold War and vis-a-vis China, the attitude is completely different. I mean, there's a striking difference between the Cold War attitude towards China or to Russia. China has become this last year the most important, even a more important in foreign trade, import and export, but export is for Germany more important than import, but then the United States. So here is a major factor of hard economic interest going of the manufacturing faction of capital going in terms of sympathy vis-a-vis China. As a result, nobody is really interested in a Cold War with China. Whilst at the same time, the the financial industry is firmly on the linked on the transatlantic train. Simple reason is without the United States, the German banking system would have gone bankrupt many times since 2008. Just to give you one example, the big German banks, but the same as in France, and for instance, they have affiliates in the United States which are considered to be bullion banks. So they can they can draw on the Federal Reserve, draw unlimited amounts from the Federal Reserve and send them over into Europe. Something, in order to create liquidity, it is unique. They could have liquidity which the European Central Bank could not provide. So as a result, they are so interwoven that I always say, if we want to cut the transatlantic, the tight transatlantic rope, we should nationalize the banks. That would be the precondition for anything else. That would be the precondition for breaking up NATO. But of course, as we know, the financial industry is the strongest economic sector in all developed countries, and they determine the policy at the top. Nevertheless, we have this split in Germany in vis-a-vis China, and vis-a-vis Russia. It is quite different, because the the share of German exports to Russia is relatively small. I think we are exporting in value more to Luxembourg than to Russia overall, including Swedes. But of course, it has gone down, and of course there are hundreds of thousands of jobs still involved in this business. But it is much easier for the financial industry to dominate a relatively small industrial group that is primarily also still located in East Germany, which hasn't got much, their representatives haven't got much say in the government so far. So that put it that way, the tensions to reignite the tension with Russia is much easier from Washington along that line than via China.
Thank you very much. So I see that Bruno Drosky would like to add something, and then Attila afterwards. Then we have also a few other questions. I'll also ask our other speakers, Francesco and Rada Drobats, if you'd like to add. And also, I should say to all of our speakers, as you answer these questions, if you have some points that you would like to add, given what we've just heard from the other speakers, please feel free to do that if you'd like to respond to each other now during the discussion session. So Bruno, Please.
So what was asked, in fact, is based on a fundamental for me question I have no answer about. The question is there in Europe, and especially in France, or especially also in Central Eastern Europe, is there something now like a national bourgeoisie? Because I cannot observe a situation where you have people linked with the production, with the economy, that are having the courage to criticize the present order, the present ideological order, in France especially, or in Poland, the two countries I know best, and especially in France, which was supposed to be a power, but which is not anymore, according to me. And of course, I told that there is some unrest in France. I'm not talking now about the grassroots unrest. I'm talking about unrest or miscontent among elites. So, for example, this week, as I told you, there was a general of the army protesting against the NATO policies, which is quite important, but it's coming from the administration, it's coming from the state apparatus, it's not coming from the economical elite. And that's why the basic question, is there a national bourgeoisie having their own aims, their own interests, not linked with North Atlantic unipolar US system, is very important. Maybe the situation is a little bit different in Germany. I don't know. But in France, I don't see a national bourgeoisie, and definitely I don't see any national bourgeoisie in France, in Poland. So I guess that things will not change until the moment there will be if there will be a grassroots bottom-up movement from masses, and I'm not sure, of course, it will happen. That's one thing. The second thing, of course, according to me, the basic contradiction in the world now on the state level is between USA and China. That's for me obvious that Russia is not the most important competitor to the present world unipolar order. It's China. And according to me, and we can discuss about that, my conception, which I repeat, is that Russia is not a complete economy, and Russia is something like a tool of China. I don't want to say that Russia doesn't decide its politics, but in fact, the balance of power pushes Russia to play a very important role in the world, but a role I would define as the shield and the sword of China. Maybe the Russians don't agree with that, but they do it. In fact, they are competing openly with the West. They are competing, but in fact, they have not the economical base China has. And in a certain sense, China doesn't want, up to recently at least, doesn't want to appear as a first power. But China is the first power, and Russia appears as a very as a key player in world affairs. But basically, it's China behind Russia. Of course, this can be discussed, but that's my theory: the theory of Russian shield and sword of China.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Attila.
Yes, I try to be short because questions are piling up, and. But just 2 points, once again, not solving both very important comments. The first one to John. John, I agree, and I think I tried to make it crystal clear that in certain sense, China has taken over that counter position like what we could see in the case of the Soviet Union. So that for me, from a social, economic, and political point of view, is very clear. But it doesn't mean, I think, that in the analysis we have to play down the problem of Russia and how it comes into the American strategies, why Russia is in continuous battle now because of the American politics, and then how the US is trying to to cause trouble to Russia and the other way around as well. I think that is an important thing, especially from a European point of view. So that I think does not mean that we should not deal with this. So in that sense, I think it's important. The second is the amazingly important question of Radhika concerning the dividing lines. Let me comment it from the point of view of some East European countries where I could see certain dividing lines in this. So I think that the West has been able to secure its position in Eastern Europe massively. So basically they dominate the whole region. It's open and institutionally integrated and so on and so on. That's not the question. The second is that we have a massive elite in Eastern Europe, business elite and political elite, which is willing to support this institutional dominance and so on forever, right? Because this is also their interest, and they also try to relate their business interest into that. Some of the groups are challenging this, and this is how it actually came into things like, for instance, in Hungary. So the authoritarian turn in Hungary can only be understood if we understand that certain business groups try to challenge this hegemony, and in that, Turkey, Russia, Azerbaijan, China, everything comes handy because they are trying to challenge. For that purpose, they also were able to secure the state for themselves in order to use them to reshuffle some of the cards. Don't be mistaken. So we are not talking about a complete reshuffle of cards, right? We are talking about a certain percentage of the cards are going to be reshuffled with the help of the state into these business interests, and these business groups are doing this. It's not just, in Hungary, I can see it in other countries as well in Eastern Europe. And I think that's a dividing line which feeds local politics. To the extent how important this is globally, it's difficult for me to evaluate. I am not an East European who is overestimating the importance of Eastern Europe. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to Francesco now to speak on these issues.
Yes, thanks. Talking about the difference between business and political elites, it came to my mind China's strategy. China's strategy of integrating its economy with the international economy has a double significance, in my understanding, of course. On the one hand, they have used the opportunity to catch up with the industrial and technological gap and develop its own country's productive forces. But on the other hand, however, they created an alliance that makes as unprofitable as possible for the imperialist countries to conduct a war of aggression against their countries. And it was clear during the Trump administration so-called trade war, when big important corporates in the US were openly against this strategy. In this way, they were able to divide the business elite, or part of the business elite with the political elite. And in this way, try to make less offensive as possible, less aggressive as possible, the imperialist countries. Also, Professor Ross asked to all of us some more, if I well understood, some more, consideration about the Cold War between US and China. If it's possible, I would like to share with you a map, if I can, on the screen. No, I can't.
I will make you co-host. Just give me a
sorry for the trouble.
Yeah, no, that's no problem at all.
Or I can put it in our chat.
There you go. You can share now.
Okay. I need to open first, maybe. Yes. Okay. I try again, sorry. This one. I'm sorry, it's in Italian language, but is a map that is called US versus China. And as you can see in the maritime area, those are all the military American bases that surrounded China. And also there is a strategy of alliances on the land side. Those is the result of the pivot to Asia strategy, the idea to re-dislocate forces, American forces through the Asia-Pacific, Asia-Pacific area, and shows very clear the aggressive approach of Washington against China. So their approach that was clearly explained by Mr. Chao Liang. Chao Liang is one of the most prominent advisor for military affairs in China. And he explained that their reaction to this map and their way to avoid the military confrontation with the US was the outlook of the Belt and Road strategy. That means the way to create more interconnection with other economy, in particular with the Eurasian continent, but not only with the Eurasian continent, in order to create these economic advantages among the countries that can rebalance the military ground. So their strategy is to keep from the military confrontation with the US and pushing on the economic and political cooperation. So I think that this strategy, of course, we will see if it will keep success or not, but is a way to not to not see in the current days what we have already seen during the Cold War. So it's a new strategy to keep from the new Cold War with the new diplomacy policies. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We have quite a few questions, but first I'd like to see if Rada Drobats would like to add something to this discussion, and then we'll take a second round of questions. I see that Rainer Rupp, you have your hand up. I know you want to respond to a point that was just said. We'll come back to you in after the next round of questions.
I can speak a little bit about this rivalry between China and the United States of America as some kind of the Cold War between them. As I told before, I don't see it that way. I see that the United States was in some period of time the unipolar mighty country that obliged many countries in the world to do what they do and what is their interest. But the time changed. They lost the view over China. China grew up very much economically. They were concentrated, it seems to me, to Russia, because with Russia they have a very, very long period of mutual misunderstandings about the world affairs. And suddenly, in one moment, China appeared as a very strong opponent to the United States. What is happening now is that China has enormous money. They are investing all over the world, including in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, everywhere. They are very, very well located, surrounded by Asia countries, not by, if I can say, very big enemies, as it is the case of Russia or some other countries in Europe or Serbia, for example. And they have the possibility to defend themselves, to choose the time, slowly become really mighty without conflict. I think they lost the ground for the conflict to other countries, especially Russia, and in the meantime, strengthening every day more. They are attracting many countries for the cooperation with them by giving good credits and and organizing good businesses in those countries, which is good for those countries and which is good for China. European Union, United States of America, and the most important country of Europe can compete with China in that field. And China is fulfilling this gap, especially important in Europe. I must say that in Serbia, they are building a lot of things in very good conditions. And for the development of Serbia, this is very important. You must know that Serbia has a long history of independent policy as possible, and the search of the most positive solution for the problems of the development. So for us, for Serbia, it is not the problem to cooperate with the United States of America, but from that side, we don't have serious approaches, more or less. We would like to cooperate with many other countries, but those countries doesn't have the possibility of that or doesn't have the interest. So for us, cooperation with China is a good solution for the infrastructure and economy to build our country as faster as possible with good financial agreements. I think that this is the way how China is becoming important. On the other hand, China was underestimated from the United States because 20 years ago, that was a country of the third world, if I can say. And suddenly, slowly, without many public relations, it became very powerful, especially in the trade. So now we are in the position that the West, but mainly United States of America, have to decide. They would compete with China or with Russia or with both. And at the same time, they had problem with European Union, who is itself in problems. So it seems to me that the whole Western world entered in the phase of complication between them and among their members. And this is a very good position for Russia and for China. The reason what the West will do, produce problems on the borders of those countries, this is evident. They are doing all the time this in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Taiwan and many other countries. But I'm not sure if those problems are on the scale to make big trouble to those countries. They are too mighty now. The momentum in which they were weak passed. And now the Western country has to realize that they have serious rivals on the other side.
Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. We'll take another round of questions now. There are a number of questions. I'm going to ask the questioners to keep it very short so that we can have as many people speak as possible. Please come quickly to your question, that is. And then after the questions, first we'll go to Rainer and we'll give another round to our speakers. Okay, so first, Alesia, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I believe it was Mr. Attila Melger that mentioned the West's tendencies to view everything from an Orientalist viewpoint, which is, I guess, inevitable. And anyone who feels comfortable with answering this can. Do you think to better relations between the Eastern and Western world, some acknowledgement of Orientalism in the West is necessary, or perhaps some sort of liaison between the two sides?
Great, thank you very much, Alesia. Let's take a question now from Makoto Ito. And you're muted.
I would like to raise a problem about a sort of distinction line of ideology. You know, in old Cold War, we could see very clearly ideological distinction between socialism and capitalism in regional distinction line, as well as global issues for North and South. South dependencies grow, expected socialist revolution for the future. Okay, in the new Cold War, it is a problematic whether we are arguing the same distinction line or not. Many problems discussed today concerns regional and national hegemonic rivalry in the world. But where we should locate distinction line between socialism and capitalism. In my image, it is confusing whether China and Russia represent socialism only. So on the other hand, that developed countries or advanced countries also include now the ideological tensions between oppressed working class and top elite of elites or wealthier persons as for their future. And we have to argue more complex situations of distinction line in a global scale, whether we are facing alternative for future capitalism in another way rather than neoliberalism, but still in social democracy. And also we can probably need to consider ecological crisis and many other economic issues oppressing people's life, COVID-19 and so forth, and whether it is solved or not by capitalist framework or not. So the distinction line can probably be more universal in the world in the case of new Cold War. You see, it is not distinction line between regional, nationwide problem. You see, ideological rivalry for the future remains a big issue. 21st century model of not probably neoliberalism anymore, but not just nationalism, whether it is to be 21st century model of social democracy in some kind, or socialism beyond capitalism. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question. Next, we'll have Michael Wong-Sam.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I very much agree with the framework which was put forward by Francesco, and I think in that framework it's obvious that there is a situation of a Cold War, although it's not the same as the situation after the Second World War. And the reason that you can call it the Cold War is because, according to the Truman Doctrine, after the Second World War, there was the priority for imperialism was to contain the further advance of the strength of the Soviet Union after and during the Second World War. They advanced throughout Eastern Europe, and that was followed incidentally by revolutions in Yugoslavia, China, and the unfolding of revolutions throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Now, the situation is that they want to contain the emergence of China as a competitor to the United States. And I think that the reason that you can see this is in Cold War terms is one, because via the Bush Doctrine, all of the countries, and this was outlined, I think, by Bruno, all of the countries which wanted to struggled to maintain their national sovereignty were deemed to be rogue states by the United States. And two, there was a divergence between what happened in the communist countries in 1989, for instance. The Berlin Wall came down in 1989, and there was a student protest in Tiananmen Square in China, both in 1989. However, there was a catastrophe in Eastern Europe, whereas in China, there was a development of the economy, the quadrupling of median wages, and the increasing popularity amongst the people of the Communist Party of China, and so therefore, and so that is the situation which gives us the justification to call this a Cold War, in that countries who want to maintain their national sovereignty increasingly now are being drawn into the orbit of China, and so therefore geopolitically the world is breaking up into two hostile camps. That's the situation. And so but my question therefore is, and I'd like whoever in the speakers list wants to respond to this, is that in Europe this is a crucial question, because Europe is developing a bit of a schizophrenic personality. It looks so politically, it looks across the Atlantic, politically and culturally, ideologically and everything else like that, it looks across the Atlantic to the United States, but its economic interests increasingly are in Eurasian integration. And this was alluded to by a number of speakers. Now for the left, therefore, it's necessary to be able to resolve at some point this schizophrenic situation in Europe. Europe has to decide which way it's going to go. So I'd like to hear from the contributors what they think the state of the left is in Europe on this particular question of this, whether Europe, in other words, which way is Europe going?
Great, thank you very much. Now let's have a question from Claudia Chaffan. And let me remind you, please keep your questions very short so that we have time to come back to as much as possible.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you everyone for this fascinating presentations. My question is essentially if just the whole panel, if people might be able to elaborate on the role of the, let me put it this way, Anglophone world, including but beyond the role of the USA in this new Cold War. And very, very briefly, the background of my question is I'm originally from South America. I've lived the last 5 years in Canada. And in these debates, generally, maybe not here, but I hardly ever, hear the significance of countries, for instance, like Canada. And I myself wasn't aware of it until I came to Canada to live. And the part of the world that I follow most, which is Latin America, my own area of the world, in every single major transformation, say Bolivia, Venezuela, Nicaragua, et cetera, Canada has played a tremendous role in promoting the American imperial goals, and for instance, as against the role of China, that in my own experience and travels has been generally welcomed by people, but the ideological curtain of silence around the role of Canada is quite compelling. So maybe people could comment on that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And let's have just one more question and then we'll come to our speakers again. And again, keep it short. It's for Halina Mokushina. Halina?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Good day, everybody. So I have two questions. First question is directed towards our European colleagues, to Attila and Bruno. How do you see, because especially in the case of Poland, the official position in foreign policy is very anti-Russian. And I was wondering if there are some forces, political, social, or otherwise, who are more friendly towards Russia. The same question about Hungary. And in general, what is the position, economical, political? It's a general question of Eastern Europe versus Western Europe in the European Union. And the second question is about, is ideological one, whether, because I haven't really followed so closely the Chinese foreign policy, do you see any kind of ideological aspect in Chinese foreign policy? Because obviously the communist party is there, but that it's not so, it's absent from what I can see in the foreign policy interventions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So Rainer Rupp, please, would you like to answer? And then we'll come also to our other speakers to answer these kinds of questions.
Shortly, the question, the left in Europe, there was a question on this, how strong or what is the left in Europe thinking? I can speak for Germany. The German left is basically non-existent anymore. Only in word, they are still calling themselves left, but most left positions they have shed. The left has been, I mean, it's a vacuum. In this vacuum now has moved a hodgepodge of what one could actually call anarchist groupings of protests, mass protests flaring up for a month or two, movements disappearing, another mass protest, another movement, all no ideology anymore, no, but not necessarily right wing, but social elements in the protests. But if it comes to war or the genuine aspects of say women's equality, equal pay for the same work, this has been replaced by hysteric gender discussions which dominate the left, etc. So the left doesn't exist anymore. The other point I think Bruno made, I wanted to add something, because what you came down to was, I mean, Russia being shield and sword for China, which is basically a question of the strategic or military balance. Now, if you're looking at this very short and globally, it's the United States is still militarily the one superpower in terms of power projection, etc. However, militarily it is so, economically it is not anymore, politically its support worldwide is also dwindling. So basically it's a military superpower on crumbling stealth. At the same time, the projection of US power is not anymore global. I mean, within the region of China, even a very recent military wargaming came out just a few days ago about what would happen in a war against China in the South China Sea or the Straits of Taiwan. The Americans would lose, and from year to year, this war game, they would lose faster. So the same applies to if we would have a major land war against Russia. Not NATO, but US and a few friends from Ukraine and Poland, etc. The wargaming there is the same. The US would lose very fast and very quickly. Now, if we are looking at the shield and sword issue, when Obama and Hillary Clinton offered Moscow a reset, you remember, it was more or less about the same time when Obama initiated his pivot to Asia to put 60% of military forces towards China. It was very clear, if you read the papers, it was very clear that they wanted to get Russia back into the international community, as they call it, in order to have a free back against China. Now, Russia did not, I mean, we know what came out of this reset. And very recently, I mean, what came out of the reset, instead, the strategic partnership between Russia and China has grown more and more and more tighter. Even a few weeks ago, there was even a rumor, well, which was partially kind of denied by the Chinese foreign minister, but not exactly, that there was a military alliance about to be created between China and Russia. So the term, the Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs said, no, not military alliance, but we will strengthen further our partnership, etc. So they're avoiding the alliance for a number of political reasons. But de facto, we see a movement closer and closer together in military maneuvers and in staff maneuvers, etc. So coordination of action, not only military, but political in United Nations, elsewhere. So we are seeing here a block. Now, to think that Russia is just for China the shield and sword, okay, in military terms, Russia has a much stronger strategic capability as China, nuclear, launch-wise, etc. On the other hand, China has that what Russia doesn't have. It's got the capital, international banking connections, etc. And again, there we can see they're working together too. They're creating an alternative to the SWIFT financial transfer, etc., etc., etc. So they are actually making they're making the West redundant. They don't need the West so much anymore. They still need it, but it is not so important anymore. And if we see what happens through the sanctions, the Americans are and the West been shooting themselves in the foot with the sanctions, because as a result of Russia having joined the WTO, the borders were open. There was no tax on the western flood of for instance, foodstuff, etc., etc. Russian industry didn't have light industry didn't have a chance to develop. Now it is there and it's doing well. It is relevant. And what people hardly know, Russia has become the lead export, not the lead, the most important exporter of cereals and foodstuff in the world. So it's Russia alone, not Soviet Union, Russia. So it's tremendous developments there too. And we have actually, Russia is not just a military colossus. It lacks in a number of ways. It's not, as you said, Bruno, correctly, it's not a complete economy. It's not the optimum currency state, as the economists would say. China has all this, yeah. But in connection with the two, it brings a real opposition to the Western-centered strategies, and it actually blocks issues for them. They can't do what they want anymore. And I think that is, the further this develops, it's the better, and it makes world peace safer.
Great, thank you very much, Rainer. We'll go now to Attila.
Yes, I think I tried to look at also the questions in the chat because a lot of questions have been coming up, and then very briefly I tried to reflect to some of the questions which were also posed to me as well. But I think the first thing I would like to make clear is that there was a very important comment: what does it mean from the point of view of the left? And I think this we could not discuss. So most probably there should be a next session when we actually evaluate the historical developments from a leftist point of view. Because I think this is a very delicate issue, how to analyze all these developments from the point of view of collective rationality, socialism, humanism, and the true sense of democracy. That is, I think, is a major question, but and then this. But The first thing is that I would like to be away with some of the illusions concerning this, whether Europe should defend itself, not itself. Look, this is global capitalism. Global capitalism is about the dramatic competition and the destruction of society at the same time, and using this in all different ways. So I am going to be the last who is going to cry for European capitalism as such that it is losing ground. Well, I think I would like to see the same thing with the US capitalism and so on and so on. So in that sense, I think it's very important to understand. Most important is somebody mentioned this Orientalism. Look, this is a basic language of European capitalism. This came in the colonial period, in the period of imperialism, and it is with us, and I am pretty sure that this is going to remain us. Europe is not going to be, European capitalism is not going to be able to figure out a new language concerning this. So it's going to collapse. Even at the last day, they're going to use Orientalist racist language against everybody else. Why not? Because that's that thing. The next question, I could see what's coming from Makoto concerning no ideological differences. I think it's a very interesting point, but I don't agree with this completely. Because I think that concerning China, there is a dramatic ideological difference. The only thing that this is not so much played out at the moment. In that sense, I agree, but the ideological difference is dramatic in a lot of ways. And then I would not play that down. Then there was a question whether there would be an EU or European common strategy. I think at the moment I don't see that as a big possibility. That the European Union, in that sense, was a big attempt on behalf of European capitalist countries to dominate and then to formulate some kind of a common strategy. I think this is failing at the moment, so I don't see it actually falling apart in all different parts. So I don't think that it's going to happen. Europe, whether Europe is schizophrenic. Yes, absolutely. But Europe, in that sense, is dominated by the US I mean, most European countries. So in case you follow, for instance, German foreign policy, which was always more friendly toward Russia, and even, you know, in China as well. Nonetheless, when the order came from Washington, they changed their policy almost like this. Because so look at the policy of Merkel, how it was developing and so on. So that was the case. So in that sense, once again, I think it has been schizophrenic for a lot of ways. Even I would say, as a leftist, I would say it's completely schizophrenic because it has so much potential to be used, and at the same time it's wasting this at a dramatic rate. Okay, there was one more question, and then I finish. Whether whether Hungary is different from Poland in terms of relationship to Russia. Yes, it is. In geopolitically, it's different. Poland is absolutely, as historically previously as well, has been in an anti-Russian position. Hungary shifted in this during the 1990s and 2000s, and now, as I was trying to explain, now the current government is trying to see this. I think there is another thing which they like in Russia, mainly they like this competitive strategy. That is to say, they are trying to learn techniques from Russia, how to attack some of the key power centers within Europe. And then in that sense, they are doing this. So they are, but at the same time, I would like to warn everybody that the kind of, how to put it, I don't want to be too harsh, but the pre-Second World War historical discourses are coming back in a lot of ways throughout Eastern Europe, very much in the case of Hungary, which means that on a daily basis, you can read glorifying the Hungarian army in the Soviet Union like this, and then everybody just applauds that they were heroes. So in that sense, you can see that there are some very important historical animosities here, which needs to be evaluated. Yes.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to say, since we're running out of time, or actually we're at 5 o'clock at my time now, I'd like to propose that we continue and go over time, obviously, but among our speakers, is there anybody who needs to go soon, or are you able to continue a little bit? So Rada Drobats, are you able to stay, or would you like to speak now for a moment?
If you would like, I would prefer to speak now. Can I?
Please, yes, please.
Okay, there was a lot of questions, and I would try to tell something briefly. First and all, personally, I don't believe that anymore exists the left and the right. Today, the governments and the people that run the country are utilitarists. They are using everything they can to stay on power, to get power independently, if those measures as leftist or rightist. And I think that those days, if you look the political map of any country, you will not clearly see who is who. Nobody is reading the programs of the parties. Nobody is taking care about that. And I think that this is a situation in the most of the countries in the world. The war of the day is stay in power and get the power. Independently, if we will use the left or the right arguments. This is the first thing. Also, we are living nowadays in the media tyranny. Practically, the Western countries has the property over the biggest media, TV station and other, and they are imposing to the rest of the world, first and all to their countries, their citizens, but transmitting with the media they are financing outside the same problems they would like that we all discuss. And as the lady said, some other regions' problems are not discussed at all. They're completely out of our views. So it seems to me that in the world, it's very rare that we speak about a really serious problem that we should to have some decision for the future of our lives and of the stuff. We are more discussing about the appearances and losing time over that instead of the serious thing. Also, what I would say, if we speak about the better relation between Eastern and Western countries, this is impossible. What I see from my point of view is that the big superpowers are, especially on the West, are looking everybody as a potential adversary, arrange all the way of things, how they work in the world on their interests, and doesn't want to permit to anybody to challenge that. They are speaking about the promotion of the interests of China, the promotion of the interests of Russia, but what is the promotion of their own interest, or the expansion on their countries, their armies? We saw the map. All around China, there is American bases. Where are the China bases over America? So those are the things I just mentioned that we should think about. You know, when you are the predominance in the media, you start to think and to speak what they want, see the things on their way, not what is in the reality. And I think that it is very important to be conscient. Sorry, we don't have a light anymore, but done. Okay. Okay, somebody told about the anti-Russian policy of Poland. This is also something we are facing. If you can see, I didn't mention then in Russia or in China or in Indonesia or in some other country in Latin America, there is countries advocating policies of sanction, policy of military intervention over some country because of such interest. But from the Western side, it is every time. And I cannot find where they find their legitimacy to intervene in any country. I must recall you that in '99 and even before in Bosnia and now in Serbia, in Kosovo, they intervened without the United Nations Security Council resolution and decision. They bombarded our country, destroyed, and they took the Serbian state out of Kosovo, the province of Serbia. This is completely illegal. And what was told in the international media is something different, fake. Because it is very rich region, very important for them strategically. This is what I told a few minutes ago. They will do everything to make you guilty, then to bombard you if you don't accept. And the same thing is happening now. They continue to pressure Serbia to renounce to its territory because they want it. This is the interest of America bigger than of Serbia. Could you understand that? So I think that if you open your mind to the normal thinking, you will understand much more what is happening. The policy, the strategy is to attack and to accuse somebody else for the thing you are planning. This is the preventive strike. Yes, this is what I wanted to tell you, and sorry, I must go because we don't have electricity still, and it is making dark. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rada Drobac. Thank you for being with us and joining us today. Really, thank you. So now we'll go to Bruno Drosky.
Okay, so there was different question I will try to answer about the left and about Poland. Concerning left, I would say that it's very important to understand that there are two left. There is the so-called moral left, and there is the social or the class left. And we have to be very aware that the real left, I mean the social left, the class left, must fight for every form of counter-hegemony. Of course, class hegemony, but of course, imperialist hegemony. And this needs to support every country fighting for its sovereignty, whatever their political system is. It's China, it's Russia, it's Iran, it's Syria, it's Venezuela, it's Cuba. It's not, it's basically the question is to support counter-hegemony, balance of power and peace and disarmament. Ultimately, the ultimate goal is disarmament. And this is the basic things. And in every country who has this difference between moral left and social left. But of course, in Europe, in most of countries, the so-called moral left that has the lead, and that is looking like left, but it's a pseudo left. The real left we have in the global south. In India, we have strikes organized by communists waving the communist signs and even sometimes the Stalin portrait, and they can organize a strike of 250 million people. And it's much more important, but it's not told in Western media, but it's much more important on the world scale that a manifestation for LGBT rights in Paris or in Brussels. And I'm not against LGBT, but I think it's not very basic, a very basic problem. The basic problem is world peace. And world peace means disarmament, and disarmament means multipolarity, and means that we have to support every form of counter-hegemony. Whatever we like or we don't like this type of government or that one. That's the first. Concerning Poland and Russophobia, I would say that, of course, the Polish elite, liberal ones or nationalist ones, are exactly have the exact same point of view concerning Russia, because it's their legitimacy. The legitimacy of nowadays Polish government is all of Polish elites are all only the so-called solidarity movement, and they had to make people forget that the solidarity movement, the Solidarność, was aimed to give better conditions for workers under socialism. So to make that forget, they just waved the so-called independence flag, which is just the anti-Russian flag, since Poland is much less independent now than it was during the socialist time. But in the same time, we have, if we look at the situation in Poland, we have, first of all, not a lot of, but quite important, very clever intellectuals who are not Russophobic and who are developing very interesting analysis on geopolitics, on international relations, and so on. So I would say that intellectually they are not very known, but they are very well working. If you look down in the society, if you look at popular people's classes, and especially at peasants, you will remark in Poland that people are not Russophobic, basically. If you talk to a peasant, the peasant is not Russophobic, basically, because he always will answer, when we have neighbors, we have to talk with them. That's the basic situation. The problem is, of course, the elite that control the media, the TV, and that are competing inside the system between liberals with the moral left and the nationalist and clerical, but in fact, it's inside the same system and the same ideology. What is changing now is that you have a young generation, I'm talking about the very young generation, where you find people which are radically anti-system. When I say they are radically anti-system, it means they are fed up with anti-communism. They are fed up with anti-Stalinism even. They are fed up with NATO propaganda, and they think that maybe Russia is a good country, or maybe Belarus is a good country, or maybe China is a good one. It's of course still very, very uncertain, but you see that the very young people who were brought up during the actual regime are disconnecting from the official ideology. I don't know what will happen, of course, but I think times are changing and the tide is changing. And to which extent, of course, I cannot tell you, but something is changing anyway.
Great, thank you very much, Bruno. Thank you. And now, Francesco, would you like to make some comments?
Yes, to be honest, I'm very agree with Bruno's speech, so I can add my thing to his words. I just would like to add another point, because the Mr. Ito comment was very interesting from my point of view. For a long time, in my view, personal view, for a long time, some, how to say, some, yes, for a long time, the pressure that US pushes against some countries and their resistance and popular resistance was very, they don't mark any ideological camp or any ideological debate. And it's still true, for example, if we think about the Iran or Syrian scenario. Of course, it's very different from the past when the US pushes against Vietnam and the Vietnamese people bring together the struggle to make independent their country together with the building a socialist countries. That doesn't happen now in some countries under the attack of the imperialist forces. But with regards with China, for example, I think we are living now some changing times. First of all, we see that in the last period of Trump administration, there was the attempt against China was not characterized only on geopolitical or economical aspect, but even increasingly in the time from an ideological attempt. the last speeches delivered by Mike Pompeo was some speeches clearly not against China, but against the Communist Party of China. And it was built an international campaign against the Chinese Communist Party. So the US are shifting their Cold War rhetoric, how to say, words, into an ideological, how to say, framework. So it's, I don't know, we will see how during Biden's administration it will change. In my opinion, they don't use these words, but they continue to push the confrontation among democracy and not democracy, or democracy, or those countries who are attacking the democracy model. But still continues the ideological aspect. And it's interesting from my point of view, also from a classic, how to say, what we can learn from the classic, because in my view, the class struggle is not only the conflict between the, how to say, the bourgeoisie and proletariat. It is also an exploitation of one nation by another, as Marx denounced it, and is also, of course, the oppression of the female by the male, as Engels wrote. So this multi-level dimension of the class struggle that was well understood during the Third International, when in some ways the famous Marx slogan, proletariat of all communists unite, was changed into proletariat and oppressed countries of all world unite. So this dimension of the class struggle is also the key to analyze the current situation and confrontation in the international scenario, also from Marxist perspective. So in my view, still this confrontation has an ideological shape, and not only geopolitical or economic confrontation, but this ideological aspect is growing, and we need to face with this dimension more and more in the forthcoming times.
Great, thank you so much, Francesco. Excellent. Rainer, you have your hand up. You'd like to say something? You're muted.
Yes, I'd like to just add something on German-Russian relations, which have deteriorated recently. If it had been the German government's intention over the last 6 months to destroy German-Russian relations quickly and efficiently, it did do everything right with this fake Navalny poisoning. As early as October 2019, the Russian ministry announced that German behavior had, I quote, destroyed relations and severed the bond of trust. Indeed, for Germany, whose government over the past 50 years has been always proud of its not always good relations, but of its trustworthy relations with Russia, what happened over the last 6 months is an absolute catastrophe and basically a declaration of foreign policy bankruptcy vis-à-vis Russia. Thus, one of Germany's greatest foreign and geopolitical achievements was squandered by the Merkel government in a jiffy. What for? What was the gain? The fact that the German government has intentionally destroyed the always stable relationship can be demonstrated by recent government answers to questions in the German parliament on the Navalny issues, where pertinent questions asked by parliamentarians and for instance, the left faction in the government were completely ignored. They just basically, like in the Skripal case, we claim it, it is that way, we don't need any proof. I mean, you just have to believe it. And since these answers were also closely monitored abroad, naturally also in Moscow, the Russian Foreign Ministry found very clear words for this in February concerning the Navalny case. Even the exceptionally well-skilled and ever-patient Russian top diplomat, Foreign Minister Lavrov, sees in the continuation of talks with the EU in Brussels a waste of time. And of course, it is Germany who is behind this shift within the EU against Russia. He even described the Russian-EU relationship as having already been torn to shreds. All of this is to the credit of the foreign policy elites in Berlin over the last 6 months, who hoped, I mean, they at least say so, who hoped that Biden will revive the neoliberal world order that Trump has destroyed. This was made repeatedly clear by public statements by the German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas and Chancellor Merkel. Another reason for it could also be that we see France and Germany jockeying for the top position in the EU, and Germany so far could rely on the East European countries as a support, but the Eastern Europeans, especially for the Poles, even the Polish former president had admonished in his, a few years ago, had admonished in his speech in the German parliament, the parliamentarians complaining, if you're not more robust in your opposition against Russia, we will have to look for an alternative security agreement with looking across the Atlantic, yeah. And of course, Germany fears that it would lose the support of Poland and the Baltic states, etc., within the EU. That could be another reason, but both reasons, siding up with the Americans and trying to keep the Eastern Europeans in the fold to secure its position as top dog in the EU seem to go in the same direction, bad relations with Russia. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Rainer. So I think that we're out of time now. We've run over our time period. We're going to have to close unless there's anything very urgent that any of our speakers want to add. I don't see any hands up anymore, but so I think we'll close now. I want to thank all of our speakers very sincerely. This has been an excellent panel, and I think that we've opened so many different questions that need to be discussed. We'll have to continue this in some form or another. I'll give the floor back to Radhika now, who will tell us a few words about our next discussion.
Thanks very much, Danielle, and thank you for organizing this fabulous panel. I think we've all had just an intellectual feast now. I think you had fantastic speakers, so thanks to them as well. I'd like to say that 2 weeks from now, that is to say on the 28th of March, we will have a panel on unpacking China's new trade deals. So we will have speakers both on the new regional comprehensive economic partnership, as well as the new China-EU trade deals, and more generally looking at that aspect of things. And the speakers include Bruno Drosky again, John Ross, who you heard, Horace Campbell of Syracuse University, Rainer again as well on this topic, Tomo Marukawa from the University of Tokyo, C.P. Chandrasekhar from the Center of Economic Studies and Planning in Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, Mick Dunford, who is based in Beijing and works with the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and Joseph Puruganan from the Philippine Office of Focus on the Global South. So it's going to be a packed panel. It's going to be a very stimulating panel. I think there are many complex angles to this in terms of what this means for the countries that are involved in this. So, and of course, what it means for the structure of power in the world economy. So thanks very much again. And I should add that the following fortnight, so on April the 11th, we are planning a panel on what Francesco had mentioned, namely the longer telegram. That is to say, what does it tell us about the Biden era foreign policy? So we will again have, we're still finalizing it. You will hear about it. So I hope very much that you will join us. Thank you very much once again from the International Manifesto Group, and hope to see you again in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.